Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. I am so excited to be sharing this episode with you because my guest today is none other than Diana Rose Harper. Diana Rose has been one of my astrology mentors for the past few years, and Diana is a truly brilliant astrologer and an amazing human being. I think you will just fall in love with Diana from this conversation. And yeah, if you have been enjoying this podcast, if you've been enjoying my approach, then you also have Diana to thank because Diana's approach has really kind of influenced me over time and over the slow unfolding of our work together. If you are familiar with this podcast, you know that I do these weekly contemplations, taking in the astrology into consideration, which I release usually at the beginning of the week. And that actually, fun fact, came as an assignment from Diana. The original assignment was for me to write about it, about the astrology of the week or the astrology of the moment or whatever. But I stumbled upon recording them and then I started sharing them on the podcast, and many people who listen to the podcast have been telling me that they enjoy those contemplations. So that's literally an assignment from Diana. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Diana and I talk basically about the astrology of 2023, but we also spent the first third or so of our conversation discussing this idea of the New Year resolutions and how we can approach that and how we can come into right relationship with that concept. We also spoke about things like food, like diet culture, like school trauma. So if those things are things that may bring something up for you, just be aware that that's in our conversation. And with regards to 2023, you may or may not know that the astrology of 2023 is pretty wild, right? Which is why I wanted to have this larger overview episode and to discuss this with Diana, because the year starts off a little bit on the slow side with Mars and Mercury going retrograde and not really going direct until a little later in the month of January, which is probably when this episode is going to come out. But Saturn then enters Pisces, and then Pluto will be dipping into Aquarius. The nodes are going to be shifting from the Taurus-Scorpio axis into the Aries-Libra axis. Mercury is moving away from doing retrogrades in air signs into earth signs. And then Venus will be going retrograde in Leo in the middle of the year. So no biggie. Just quite a few pretty major astrological shifts and changes and transits. And we spoke about all of that in depth, but Diana and I are also aware that one of our intentions is to make sure that this conversation is something that will give you the larger arc, right? The broad overview, the central questions to be asking yourself throughout the year of 2023. Right. So we made sure that we not only went deep, but we also kept the kind of big picture in mind. Okay, so let me introduce you to Diana by way of her bio. Diana is an astrologer, tarot reader, energy worker, writer, and educator with a history of being a body worker and rare books research assistant. Diana Rose has written quite a bit for House Witch's community page, served as one half of the Rosebud Tarot, contributed an article on the ethics of astrological prediction to Wired, and has been featured in many podcasts from the Astrology podcast to Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness. 3 times she has been a lecturer at Norwalk. All right, I will let you get into this conversation, and I hope that you enjoy. I will see you on the other side of this. Welcome, Diana. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. I love having conversations with you.
I always look forward to our monthly time together. And yeah, you're someone who I feel like you've really influenced my practice and the way that I approach astrology. And it's truly, I'm always astounded by your generosity and your brilliance. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Very much so.
So today we're going to be talking about the astrology of 2023, but just to start us off, I kind of want to introduce people to you. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about you, about your practice, about how you got into your current astrological practice and magical practices, as well as maybe, start a little bit with your sun, moon, rising, if that's okay with you.
So I'm a Sagittarius sun and moon with a Capricorn rising. And one of my primary important astrology stories actually is realizing my correct birth time. So for the first 27-ish, 28-ish years of my life, I thought that I was a Sagittarius rising. And then within months of the beginning of my Saturn return, I found my birth certificate in like a pile of documents that my grandmother had sent me. And I'd been using a birth time that was 10 minutes off. And that put me into being a Capricorn rising, which is really funny because it meant that I went from thinking I was having a second house Saturn return to having a first house Saturn return. And the first big moment was a restructuring of my sense of self through the structure of my natal chart changing based on my ascendant changing signs. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's really funny. And then, my first real, it wasn't my first astrology reading that I'd ever received, but within a month of that happening, I received a reading from Kelly Surtees with my updated birth time. So that was really cool.
That's amazing.
Anyway, what's also interesting though is I think that story in a way translates very directly into what I currently understand my practice to be. And undergirding my practice is this orientation towards figuring out what it actually means to be human and identifying ways to embrace being human, to be in love with being human, and to be human in a way that's decentering humanness in interesting ways. It's being human as a part of ecosystem, like literal environmental ecosystem, but also spiritual, metaphysical ecosystem. And, to have a first house Saturn return is just who am I and what is my place in the world? How do I understand my selfhood to be interacting with everything else? The ruler of my sun and my moon and my Mercury, all in Sagittarius, is Jupiter in the 7th house, opposite my Saturn. And so this dance of personal identity and relationship with the world is literally baked into my chart. And that is what I understand my practice to be. Whether I'm using astrology or another modality, it's about becoming the human that one has the potential of becoming, understanding that potential comes with the responsibility of occupying the niche that you are most well equipped to occupy. That niche being where you are actually going to find the most delight, and also be the most contributive in the way that you have the capacity to be contributive to the world. And that's love, that's care, right? Caring for the world in a genuine way starts with being yourself.
Wow.
So that's what I understand myself to be doing here.
Yeah.
And astrology is just an exceptionally wonderful language, tool, art form for engaging with that underlying motivation. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I really love that, Diana. I also think that how Saturnian to be told, like your birth time was wrong. Look at this other chart,
Your documentation was incorrect.
Yes.
Madame. Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that story. And yeah, I feel like I really appreciate your the ways that you invite us through your work to really have this direct relationship with the planets. Something that that was coming up as you were speaking was something you told me before, which was that to really distinguish between our ideas about spirit and about deities and about the spirit realm versus actual, like, the spirits themselves, and how that shows up in astrology. And yeah, I feel like that kind of was something that you were saying too, like to remember ourselves not as just like individuals as we understand it in like the human centric way that we've been conditioned, but to kind of see ourselves as part of this larger web. Yeah.
100%. 100%. Like that's one of the things I think about quite a bit, actually. And like one of the things that's influenced me the most are some of the like the Anishinaabe creation stories of Ojibwe. Like, I don't know how best to categorize it, but it's sort of like the northeast-ish corner of the so-called United States, which is also kind of like the southeast corner of the so-called Canada, right? The peoples from that area have this creation story that, there are other similar creation stories in the world, but the idea is that the creator created everybody else on the planet first before humans came to be here. And so humans are actually the little brother, like the little siblings of everybody else. And everyone else here, like part of the first agreements of creation is that you take care of each other. And part of the purpose of everybody is to be taking care of everybody, to be mutually responsible for everyone. And when humans forget that we are the youngest siblings and instead try to pretend like we are the head honchos, that's when shit goes to shit. Because that's like letting the 5-year-old decide what everybody's going to eat for dinner.
Yeah. Or
what the rules of the day are. And that becomes non-functional very quickly. And so for me, there is quite a lot of understanding and like returning over and over and over and over and over again to the reality that we literally cannot exist without all of the other beings who occupy this specific planet with us, and also without all of the beings that occupy the cosmos with us, right? And to pretend like we are the smartest ones and that we are the cleverest ones and that we are the ones that should be solving all of the problems and our priorities should be the priorities. It's hubris. It's Icarus flying too close to the sun. And the fall is hard. And so to right size self-concept, both on an individual human level, but also on a species level, is a survival need, not just for humans, but also for all of our brethren here on this planet.
I was recently listening to this podcast about horses and about people who work with horses. And
That's so cool.
I think it's so fascinating that, something that the host and their guests kind of brought up in this conversation was this idea that animals and children are always kind of in present time, whereas for us conditioned humans, so-called educated humans, this idea of kind of coming back to presence is actually really, really difficult.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is probably one of many good evidence of what you were just talking about, that we are really the younger sibling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, what you're saying is interesting because astrology is one of these things that allows us to be in present time, but also allows us to be in past and future time in interesting ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's like astrology can be such a wonderful, I mean, it's a tool, right? And so you can use it to make yourself more anxious and more controlling and, trying to dictate what is going to happen and that sort of thing. But it can also be very right sizing of how much
Mm-hmm.
you can control and what is
Mm-hmm.
actually within your power to do, given the description of certain times based on astrological movement. And it's really interesting too, because it's like even animals that are in present time, there are a lot of animals whose present time includes planning for the future, right? Like squirrels hoarding nuts,
Totally.
right? Like that's planning for the future. That's like an animal level, like wisdom that
Mm-hmm.
this bumper crop of acorns needs to be around during the cold of winter when there aren't acorns to snack on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like birds who migrate to, like, for whatever reason, they are also anticipating that. Like they don't start building a nest in the days before migration. So the idea that humans are the only ones that plan is actually an interesting thing to investigate whenever you actually look at animal behavior, like non-human animal behavior, because remember, humans are animals too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. So I feel like that provides such a beautiful segue into what we are really wanting to talk about today, which is the astrology of 2023. And before we kind of get deeper into the astrology side itself, I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts around like how we can work with year ahead astrological transmissions in general, right? I know a lot of people listening probably like to get like year ahead readings, or like, solar return readings, right? But in general, when we're talking about looking at longer stretches of time, and 1 year is not super long, right? But it's still longer than like a week. What are some of the things that you usually consider for yourself or that you tell clients and students?
Yeah. So looking at trends over the course of a year can be very helpful in terms of focusing your energy, right? So, on a very individual level, we have individual timing techniques like annual perfections or planetary decades or secondary progressions or solar return charts and like all of that sort of stuff that can help a specific individual, get clear on what they want to put the most energy and time and attention into, as well as what they might want to plan around or plan for. If you have goals of things that you're trying to accomplish or events, travel, things like that you're trying to plan, understanding the shape of the year for yourself as an individual is helpful. And that also is helpful to look at the shape of the overall year. Like for me, it's this really weird thing, and I've noticed more people being in this zone lately. Like the past couple of years with the panini pressing has, I remember especially like 2020 and 2021 just feeling this like utter like void around the fact that it felt like I couldn't plan. I couldn't have goals because I didn't know what the fuck was going to happen.
Exactly.
And somehow now, like at the end of 2022, I'm like, I have goals. I'm really excited. I have things that I want to achieve and accomplish. And like a lot of them are not things that are dependent on external circumstances. They can be affected by external circumstances, but it's not like I'm going to go to this place in July and then there's like another random panini press that eliminates all travel, like like that kind of thing. I'm not doing that planning, but I am doing other forms of planning of kind of personal development, business development, long-term planning, and like setting up structures for long-term planning. And then using the astrology of 2023, like looking at the year I can then think, okay, I want to have this particular goal or this particular foundation laid by the time that this astrological event happens. Understanding something like, it's like there's this concept of the Mercury elemental year, which for the curious, we'll probably talk about this more, but Gary Caton's book, Hermetica Triptycha, is very useful for thinking about this. The Mercury retrogrades this coming year are all in earth signs. So you can be like, okay, I'm going to be encouraged, astrologically speaking, to do mercurial reconfiguration in these parts of my life, wherever the earth signs are in your chart. And that can be part of how you structure your year of, okay, so I'm not going to try to get things moving during that Mercury retrograde in my ninth. Instead, I'm going to use that time to blah, 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 And so that kind of planning ahead, you might not know exactly what will come up for you, but you'll be able to have a general sense of favorability for doing certain kinds of engagement, and also reduction of frustration because you're not trying to do something at a time that's not facilitative of whatever it is that you might want to try to do.
I love that. Yeah. I love what you brought into the conversation here around the idea of reduction of frustration, because I have found that, it is kind of walking a fine line, right, between kind of being all doom and gloom and just realizing that there is a particular shape to the obstacle that we might be encountering, and that kind of contemplating, really feeling into the shape of that obstacle actually provides sometimes ideations around like what the solutions can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to have a certain amount of foresight, like forewarned is forearmed, is like one of the phrases that, I've heard both out of Chris Brennan's mouth, but also out of my main teacher, Austin Kopic's mouth. When you can plan ahead for what looks like might be hairy or challenging circumstances, it doesn't eliminate the challenge, but it does mean that you can go into that challenge with the appropriate gear, right? So it's like knowing that it's going to rain, or that there's an 80% chance of rain, means you wear the waterproof footwear and you take along the umbrella. Whereas if you didn't know it was going to rain and you didn't pay attention to the other signs besides the weatherman's report, it's like, oh, it looks really gray outside. It's, you don't need astrology to tell you that the vibes of a particular time are the vibes of a particular time when you can plug into the vibes using not-astrology, right? But if you're not paying attention to the vibes and you're not paying attention to the astrology, you might get caught outside with like your most expensive pair of leather shoes in a downpour,
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of brought me to the idea of resolutions, which, kind of the end of the year, the beginning of a new year in the Gregorian calendar, there's always so much collective messaging and energy around like needing to set resolutions. I'm curious to hear, what are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So there's so much energy around that, around the Gregorian calendar. Like there's like one time I tried to pretend that wasn't real, and it's so real, right? There's such collective energy around it that it's magically still quite potent, even if it's can be seen as like kind of arbitrary in terms of like when in the year that happens. But I think resolutions are one of these things that can be quite fraught if you do not have a solid relationship with your actual self, your actual desires, what is actually functional for you. There's a lot of fix me energy that gets wrapped up in resolutioning. And it can be easy to get sucked into that riptide of fix me energy, because that's, fix me energy is the energy that is most profitable in capitalism.
Totally.
Right. But if you have a solid sense of awareness and you can construct your resolutions or your intentions in ways that actually work for you, your system, your needs, your gifts, your talents, your quirks, like all of that kind of stuff, using New Year's energy towards those ends is extraordinarily potent. Right. So, even if your resolution is releasing fix me energy, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things you can get really innovative of, just being like, okay, my New Year's intention is throughout this year to have increased clarity on what I genuinely desire.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you use New Year's energy for that, like, I guarantee you that throughout 2023, you are going to be coming into a much stronger sense of what you genuinely desire, understanding that the process of getting there might not be particularly cute sometimes. But I mean, like, just for real, like, me learning about what I genuinely desire, part of that for me in relationships was heartbreak after heartbreak, disappointment after disappointment. And then eventually I'm just like, oh shit, what I actually want is this thing over here that I haven't even been prioritizing. So anyway, all of that to say, if you can construct your intentions and your resolutions in life-affirming, purpose-affirming, self-affirming ways, and with a process, like, it can take a long time to release fix me energy, right? Or like, maybe I should explain what I mean when I say fix me energy.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think that would be useful? Okay,
I think so. Yeah.
It's sort of shorthand for the intensity of energy that I witness in so many people, and that I also have witnessed in myself. I've worked on quite a lot in myself. I won't claim that I have like completely eliminated it within myself, because I think as soon as I claim that, I will be smacked in the face with evidence otherwise. But it's like, am I good enough? Right? And if I was more this, then maybe I would be good enough. And this thing is wrong with me, so I have to fix this thing that's wrong with me. And then maybe I will get to be happy, or I'll get to enjoy my life, or I'll get this, marker of success that for whatever reason my psyche has clung to as the thing that needs to be achieved. And oftentimes people just have a generalized, like, I'll just be good enough, period, without being like, okay, but good enough for who, for why, for what reasons? Like, that's not necessarily part of it. It's just sort of this, like, I need to be good enough energy, which is a very cultural thing. It's, again, something that's very useful for capitalism, right? If you can convince somebody that they are broken or wrong, then you can sell something to them so that they are fixed and right.
Yeah.
Like, I was just reading about the history of hair removal, right? And this idea that, men can have like their big masculine beards and their hairy arms and, their hairy chests, and that's all very masculine. But women need to be as hairless as possible, except for their eyelashes and head hair, right? Like, it's racist in origin, like that structure, that idea. Super racist, actually. It becomes a beauty standard that becomes very cultural. And then people who have the wrong kind of hair, given what their gender conditioning is, now you get to sell them shit about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, especially more on the, like, quote unquote women side of things, of just like razors and waxing kits and, laser hair removal and electrolysis and tweezers and like all of this like stuff to be good enough, according to dictates that are extremely racist in origin, and then, ads that are like, if you're hairy in this spot, you're disgusting. Even if it doesn't say that outright, that's the implication.
Yeah.
Right? You're nasty. You're masculine. You're not feminine enough. And then it's like, okay, if I'm not good enough in this way, then I'm not going to find, heteronormative, monogamy normative love, which is the only way to actually have relational security in this society. And so that means I have to fix myself in order to deserve the love that will give me the forms of social and emotional stability that actually you can't buy, and you are already good enough for without changing yourself. So that's fix me energy. And then with like New Year's resolutions, that's, okay, I'm going to work out every single day and I'm going to lose 50 pounds and then I'll be good enough. I'm going to, meditate every day so that way I'm chill and not anxious and socially awkward, and then I'll be good enough.
Yeah.
I feel like weight loss is like the main New Year's resolution that I feel like is the most
It's such a
common.
huge one. Mm-hmm.
It's so huge. And it's also just like, why do you need to take up less space?
Right.
And like, why is the focus on weight loss rather than health gain?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it has to do with what we were talking about earlier, Diana, which is that there is this collective energy that really kind of has pedestalizes certain kind of body figure, you know? And if not like weight loss, then like that the body needs to look a certain way, you know, in order for it to fit or for it to be exalted.
It's like it's like becoming super muscular or losing lots of weight, right? Exactly. It's like for more masculinely conditioned people, it's like, get jacked this year, and like, here's your supplements, and here's your workout plan, and make sure you subscribe to Men's Health, and if you'd like to talk about steroids, like, we're gonna do that super on the DL, even though like the vast majority of like super jacked men that you see on Instagram are very likely doing some amount of drugging in order to maintain that level of super low body fat while increasing muscle mass in ways that are really unsustainable and unhealthy. Okay. Whew. Right. And then, whatever. Gender is such a fucking trap. For, quote unquote women, it's be tiny and feminine. Like, don't get ripped. It's like, here's your 30-day Pilates challenge and your 1,200 calorie diet that is also going to completely screw over your hormones, fuck with your energy levels, make it so that your skin is less radiant and you actually wrinkle faster because you have insufficient nutrients in your system. But at least for a little bit of time, you're going to fit into a smaller pair of jeans, but then your actual body is going to go into starvation mode. So then whenever you actually are eating enough food, you're going to get bigger faster than you want to because your body is afraid that it's not going to eat enough. It's not going to get enough food. And so then you're just like, anyway, it's a whole thing. We should probably put a content warning at the beginning of this episode that we end up talking about food and association with like food and health and body image stuff, because this stuff is very activating for people because it really pokes at that good enoughness, and it very easily becomes this like quite harmful relationship with the body, with food, with social expectations and standards. It's very fraught.
It is.
It's very fraught.
It is.
And, I do feel like as somebody, I think about this stuff because I've been not exactly a meathead, but like I'm really interested in body stuff, and I have been for a long time. And I feel like over the past decade, I've definitely seen a lot more people be interested in holistic health and functional nutrition and functional movement and stuff like that. But that hasn't actually eliminated the like nothing feels as good as skinny, or nothing tastes as good as skinny feels sort of rhetoric that so many people are walking around in. It's so toxic.
It is.
Like, you want to talk about a detox diet. Like, the best detox diet is to detox yourself from approaches to the body that are prioritizing anything other than genuine health. Whatever health means for you, right? Health to me is feeling comfortable and functional in my body and feeling like I have enough energy to do the things that I want to do.
Wow.
It has nothing to do with appearance.
Exactly. Thank you, Diana. We can all go home.
Yeah.
That's Astrology of 2023. No, I think that's so amazing. And also, as you were speaking, I think another strand of fix me energy that I've also seen that's perhaps a slightly more subtle strand that can sometimes even be perpetuated in more quote unquote spiritual circles, right? Is this idea of avoiding our humanity too. Like, I'm trying to not be human. Like, I mean, myself included, right? Like, I hate getting sick. I don't like not working because I love my work. Or a great example, I think, is this idea of like not knowing. To not know is very human. right?
Oh yeah.
Like sometimes I just don't know
I
shit. I can't
I
know
love not
everything.
knowing shit. I was just talking about this with some friends of mine yesterday of like even thinking about like school trauma or, just this idea that you should already know. And it's like, honey, nobody is born knowing all of the things.
No. And there are
Like
also
it's
some
literally
things.
impossible.
Exactly. And there are some things that you're just not really meant to know in this lifetime. Like that's just not really your path to figure out what that is. And you can leave it alone and you can just be like, you know what? Not my interest, not my path.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But sorry, I interrupted. Like what were you saying in terms of fix me energy and like spiritual wellness, whatever space?
Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to share about like this idea of not trying to feel our humanity. Like there are going to be some things that are just going to come up, right? Like no matter how, amazing my meditation practice is, like I'm going to experience grief. I'm going to experience jealousy. Right. Like that's part of being human.
Right. Austerity, absence, loss, insufficiency, like insecurity, uncertainty, discomfort, anger, irritability, like non-equanimity. Right. Like, yeah, I agree with you completely, where it's just like, if I get my meditation practice locked in, I will never be angry again. And it's like, you mean you'll be dead?
Exactly.
This idea that there are certain emotions that are quote unquote bad. It's like they might feel bad. You might not enjoy feeling them. That doesn't mean that they are bad. Like I don't enjoy cold weather, but cold weather is not bad. There are actually a lot of plant and animal species that require cold weather for their healthiest life cycles to occur. Like just because it feels bad to me as somebody who is very sensitive to cold doesn't mean it is bad in an objective sense. Yeah. Right? Jealousy is information. Anger is information. Grief is information. Depression is information. Dissociation is information. These aren't states of being that you want to stay inside of all of the time. But that's also true for joy and pleasure, right? Like I'm reminded of I don't know if you ever saw the movie Barbarella. I don't think so. Oh my God, it's so good. It's from like the 70s. It's like a pulp movie, I guess. Okay. I'm not exactly sure how to categorize it, but I think it's starring Jane Fonda or something. And she plays this like alien space explorer who like lands on this planet, and there's like an evil man who's like on this planet, and his method of killing people is using a machine called I think it's called the Orgasmatron or something like that, and it just pleasures people to death. Wow. Right? It's just like hilarious, but in any case, it's like it's possible for something that's really pleasurable. If you just stay inside of the acute moment of pleasure for too long, it becomes unbearable. Yeah. In the same way that staying inside of sadness for too long becomes unbearable. No emotion can be a perpetual emotion and be healthy. Yeah. Right? It's just that there are some emotions that we prefer to chase and some that we prefer to run from.
Yeah. And that the chasing and the running away from is also part of being human.
Yeah. It's like, the human experience is like a whole rainbow of experience. Right? And like one of the things that I find interesting to play with and sometimes disturbing and sometimes relieving is this idea that all of us are tiny little drops of the universe experiencing experience. And so every single experience that you're experiencing is satisfying the universe's desire to experience experience. Wow. Whatever you feel about the experience, it is satisfying the universe's desire to experience experience. So from that perspective, no experience is wrong because it's scratching an itch for the universe to experience an experience. Yeah. Now, on a very personal level, there's like experiences that were just like, I would rather not experience that ever fucking again in my entire life. Thank you very much. But that does not negate the fact that it's an experience that gets to be part of the universe's memory of experiencing experiences.
I love that. And also, you are the universe. Like you're part of the universe, And so, yeah, I love that. Thank you, Diana.
Yeah.
So, okay. How do you feel about moving into astrology of 2023?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say in that topic? Or around that topic?
I do really think that having intentions, like New Year's intentions, that are a combination of measurable and about feelings, like about, a desired state of being, like that combination of, whether it's a single intention that gets to contain both, measurable stuff and feelingsy stuff, or multiple resolutions or intentions that like run the gamut, like that's what, at least for me, what makes for satisfying and like satisfying in the moment to create and then satisfying to look back on kinds of resolutions.
Yeah.
So for example, like one of the resolutions that I'm playing with for next year is to make at least one of this particular kind of garment a season, or to like average out having made like 4 by the end of the year, right? Like that's quantifiable, right? And then like a more feelingsy based one would be I'm just trying to I'm remembering my list, like feeling more connected with my friends and like my measurable or like quantifiable plan for that is like I want to have a phone chat with at least one friend every week or as many weeks of the year as possible.
Yes.
And that to be a participating factor in that feeling more connected to my most important people.
I love that. I feel like that's such an important one. I'm gonna steal that from you. Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah. I feel like it's easy to, when part of your work is to kind of hold space for people and to be, having this really deep and meaningful interaction with people, you can forget how to just be, with friends that you've known since forever.
Absolutely. Like actually one of the friends that I've been friends with the longest, like that's a pattern that I am perpetually trying to break in how I interact with her. I'm just like, don't play the role of the person who has suggestions and advice. Just be a person, Diana. Be a person. It's challenging.
It is. Yeah. Cool. All right, so let's talk about the astrology of 2023. So, one of the things that really called to me when I started thinking about the astrology of 2023 is how we begin the year with Mars and Mercury in retrograde. And then Jupiter has just shortly before the new year moved into Aries. And so Jupiter wants to charge forward, but then answers to this boss, right, that is kind of absent or absent-minded, maybe even. I was thinking about, maybe what a good analogy that I would share about this would be. And what came to my mind is like if you have your own racing car, like a Lamborghini, but somehow you find yourself in a city with like really congested traffic, like Mexico City or like Midtown Manhattan, kind of during rush hour.
God, nightmare.
That's kind of how it felt like to me. And curious to hear how that is landing for you.
Yeah, there's very much the energy. When Jupiter entered Aries, actually, like the first couple of days of it, I literally texted a friend, I feel like a cat with the zoomies, right? Where I'm just like, I want to do all of the things and I want to do all of them right now.
Yes.
Like linear time is fake. I'm going to do all of the things right now. And yeah, like going into the year with, it's like Jupiter in Aries, Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, ruling Mars in Gemini retrograde, ruling that Jupiter in Aries. This is, I think, one of the things that I've mentioned to people is that the first few weeks of January are great for clarifying what you want your intentions to be for the year, clarifying plans, continuing to do some judicious editing based on how much energy you anticipate actually having available to you throughout the year. Thinking very clearly, with like Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, there's sort of this pragmatism, right? Peeling back in a pragmatic way, especially addressing, the Capricorn part of your chart, you can think of as like that's the material structures part of your chart. And so what are the material structures that you actually need? Which material structures need to be readjusted or refined in some way so that the propulsion of Jupiter in Aries actually has a foundation to stand on, because they're in a square relationship, Aries and Capricorn, right? And so the stronger that Capricorn part of your chart is, the further the rockets of Aries will go for you, right? It's like, I'm reminded of sprinters in the sprinting block, and so much of the sprint, your success as a sprinter, is how well you can launch off of the block, which is dependent on how well you relate with the block off of which you were launching, right? So, Mercury retrograde in Capricorn is like making sure that your block pose, like your block position, is solid. Right. And then with Mars at the end of its retrograde in Gemini, it's like bringing your focus actually into focus in a situation where it's like maybe you're on the sprinting block and there's like 12 other people around you, and you actually have like you're having weird social drama with all of them. And so it's being like, I can handle being in this weird emotional state, and like really just like slowing down your focus, because like right before it's stationed direct, a planet slows down, right? And that slowing down is like bringing focus to a very specific point, and from that point you launch. Yes. So definitely, if you're feeling annoyed with yourself for not like being able to get started on your resolutions first thing in the year, it's because it's not astrologically favorable until the last third of January. January is preparing to do your intentions and resolutions rather than doing them as soon as the calendar flips to January 1.
Exactly. I think it's really nice too, personally, I think, to have this energy starting the year, because it kind of gives you a little bit more time after the holiday rush to maybe even like reflect on what the past year has been.
Yes,
and really
absolutely.
figuring out like what intentions did I set in the beginning of last year? How did they turn out? Can I refine how I set my intentions? Is kind of how I'm feeling this one.
Absolutely. I think there's also something useful of even looking back into pre-Panini times, right? Like the last time that Jupiter was in a fire sign was in 2019, right? And so we're at the trine position of pre-Panini time when it comes to Jupiter. And so I think there's something useful of even thinking about, okay, well, what were my priorities in 2019? What were my goals in 2019? And now what are they? And can I accept that adaptation, this change? Like where have I maybe been compensating that I would like to either adapt or adjust around rather than just continue compensating? There's something very propellant about cardinal fire. And so to be able to use the end of the Mars retrograde and then the Mercury retrograde to deeply consider what you actually want to be fueling with that fiery propellant, super useful.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I recently started a note on my phone where it's like listing all the dreams that I used to have that I've kind of abandoned, like abandoned dreams notes. I feel like that might be a good practice to kind of bring in at the start of the year as well.
Yeah, totally. And this is interesting. I'm like looking at our list of dates here, and it's like the beginning of the year, which is cardinal, like cardinal Earth. And then in springtime, right? Like right before cardinal fire season, Aries season, we get these two really big movements of outer planets changing signs.
Yes.
So there's something about the beginnings of quarters, at least for the first half of the year, having this sort of preparatory and then initiatory energy.
Yeah.
right? So like I believe it's March. Is it March? When is it? March 7th? Yeah, March 7th. Saturn moves into Pisces,
Yes.
right? Is it March 23rd that Pluto moves? I don't know why I don't have this written down. Yeah, March 23rd, Pluto moves into Aquarius, right?
Yes.
And, the sun will move into Aries, bringing us into fiery season on March 20th. So there is something about March, it's like January transitions, March transitions. And then, the lunar nodes themselves move in July, Cancer season, right? So it's like cardinal earth, cardinal fire, cardinal water, right? We have this sort of structure throughout the year of things really moving that I think is really interesting.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a great
I
point.
hadn't thought
And
about
also,
that until literally just this moment.
I love that. I really love
Yeah.
that, Diana. That's brilliant. And also, doesn't Mars also exit Gemini into Cancer like in March? Like
Also
late
in March.
Is,
Yeah, March. That's let's see. Mars moves into Cancer on March 25th.
Yeah.
March is just like a very
It
potent
really
month
marches
this year.
forth.
It really marches forth. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, nobody moves on March 4th. I wish that was a thing so we could crack jokes about it. There's no notable aspects on March the 4th. But the Ides of March this year, this is something I talked about in the astrology podcast forecast. Like there's a bunch of shit with Neptune and Mars and Pluto, all happening around the center of March, plus the movement of Saturn and Pluto and Mars. Like it's really noisy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
it
really
is.
noisy month.
And I think what's interesting about it too, when I was kind of thinking about this progression of Saturn into Pisces, Pluto into Aquarius, is the fact that Jupiter had just been in Pisces, right? And so Jupiter is maybe kind of playing the older sibling to Saturn moving into Pisces. And then there's also kind of this, Saturn then that has just been in Aquarius will be exiting into Pisces, and then Pluto enters Aquarius, right? So then Saturn is kind of playing that role too for Pluto. And I'm curious to hear, if there's anything for you coming around that.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because I hadn't thought about that as like, Jupiter prepares the ground for Saturn and then Saturn prepares the ground for Pluto. But it's continuing this focus on that particular quadrant of sky. So 2017, Saturn enters Capricorn. So what was it, 2014, 2015? I'm not going to remember exactly. Like Saturn entered Sagittarius. So we can think about like Saturn's passage through Sagittarius, through Pisces, like really heavily focuses on the Saturn signs and the Jupiter signs. Right. And then in 2019, with Jupiter entering Sagittarius, we have the two graders, the greater benefic and the greater malefic, in like passing through the Jupiter and Saturn signs. Since 2008, we've had Pluto in Capricorn. Since 1990. Five. I'm not going to get this right either, right in this moment. We had Pluto in Sagittarius, right? So we had Pluto in Sagittarius, Pluto in Capricorn, and now we're about to enter the time period of Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto's only in Aquarius for like 2.5 months in 2023, but we're in that transition of Pluto into Aquarius. But there's just like this emphasized heaviness on the Jupiter and Saturn signs, the Jupiter and Saturn quadrant of the zodiac over the past, chunk of change that's been emphasized while Jupiter and Saturn have been in those places, right? And so now we're kind of in the, ombre out of that time period with like Saturn finishing up in Pisces while Jupiter's moving beyond the Jupiter and Saturn signs, which I think is it's super interesting. And then in the middle of all of that, we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius. Yeah. Right? Really ushering in the age of air. So thinking about this, like shrinking it down to, Pluto is going to be in that 0 degree of Aquarius, and that's where Pluto will station retrograde. Pluto doesn't make it all the way to 1 degree Aquarius in 2023. It just gets about halfway through the 1st degree before it stations retrograde to go back towards Capricorn. So there is something very like, I don't know. Like I'm like the image that comes to mind is like in places that have hardcore winter. The thaw is beginning, but you still have more hard freezes ahead of you. Right? It's the transition from winter into spring, but it's still very much on the winter side of things. And I feel like it's going to feel like that probably until Saturn is into Aries.
Do you know how Saturn is in Aries kind of in relation to Pluto being squarely in Aquarius? Because I know Pluto is squarely in Aquarius in like late 2024, right?
So transiting Saturn will be sextile transiting Pluto in March 28, like on March 28th of 2026, and then not again until 2047. Which at that point, it's between Saturn in Capricorn and Pluto in Pisces.
Got it.
So we get one hit with Pluto in Aquarius and Saturn in Aries. And that's not until 2026, right? So we're kind of in this thaw phase now, but then, then they'll form that aspect in 2026. That's interesting.
Yeah. So bringing it down into like the energetics of it, or how we may be feeling the impact of kind of this this planetary transit. How are you contextualizing it for yourself and for people that come to you?
Which transit?
With the really loud March, Saturn going into Pisces. Well, Pluto in Aquarius is kind of tentative, right? It's just at the initiation point, but I think, you know, Saturn in Pisces is probably a big one.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit, this has been in part influenced by like the work of Ari Felix around world building and dream worlding, but also alongside, you know, Austin has spoken quite a bit about Saturn in Pisces historically being a time when imaginal worlds are concretized. Like that's where we get The Hobbit and Dune and I believe Star Wars and Game of Thrones and World of Warcraft and, you know, like a bunch of these imaginal worlds made concrete and accessible to others through creations that are tangible, like books and video games and movies and stuff. So there is something with March of oh man, I mean, it's just such a like monumental, it's such a monumental energy, it's such a monumental shift. Like it, like when I look at it, I actually am like, you know, make sure your nervous system is extremely well nourished, right? Like February is an extremely quiet month. Like use that month to like mineralize yourself and you know, work on your, you know, if one of your intentions is meditation, like do that in February hard, you know, because thinking about March, it's such a shift. It's such a shift. And it's, you know, for those of us who are millennials, like basically our entire adult life has been Pluto in Capricorn, right? That's been since 2008. So it's big. I feel like I wish I had more tangible translations. But it's tectonic plate movement. It's like you don't know where the earthquake is going to hit and what's going to fall off the shelf and break and what's going to be like prove itself to be sturdier than you thought. You know,
I feel like Saturn in Pisces is more reachable for me to even be like contemplating about, and thinking about the Saturn in Pisces ruled by Jupiter in Aries is also kind of an interesting thing, because I do think that it's not necessarily going to feel comfortable. You know, that shift is it's kind of like I'm getting this image of Jupiter asking Saturn to do something to stretch beyond what Saturn normally would like to do, you know?
See, one of the things that I'm thinking with Saturn and Pisces is, you know, Saturn's had to be very responsible for the past 5-6 years.
Being in
right?
Capricorn and Aquarius.
Being in Capricorn and then being in Aquarius, it's like entering Pisces, that's when Saturn gets to breathe. Because it's not like once Saturn is in Pisces, it doesn't become the final dispositor of the chart again for like 25 years. Right? It doesn't occupy that like same head honcho status for over 2 decades. And so it's just like, okay, I did my job. Now I'm going to put on the kaftan, and if you need me, you don't. I'm busy. Okay, bye. Right? Like, there's this, especially when we think about Pisces as like non-normative states of consciousness, right? It's like Saturn's had to be sober and on point and in charge and delegating and editing and making sure that plans are moving forward and having to deal with people's worldview issues and having to, like navigating belief, like all of that kind of thing. In Pisces, it's like, now I get to do something else. Now I get to paint, right? Now I get to actually sit with my dreams and make meaning from them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of more what I'm thinking. Jupiter's like, yeah, I left some weed in the fridge for you.
Yes.
I also bought like your favorite chai latte concentrate. And there's a weighted blanket on the bed. Jupiter's like, I'm busy. I'm doing stuff. But the house is nice. That's kind of more the feeling that I have when it comes to that, that in conjunct between Jupiter and Saturn for the first little bit of the year is Saturn's not being given chores while Jupiter is gone.
Yeah. It also makes me wonder, what you were just sharing makes me wonder if there were going to be any more advances around, uses of psychedelics or like studies of psychedelics on like absolutely. A mundane level.
That's another Saturn and Pisces thing, actually. LSD. Right? I believe, right? And like regulations around the uses of drugs of various kind, whether those regulations are just like fearful or racist, or whether those regulations are like, what is an appropriate and responsible application of this particular thing? Appropriate and responsible according to a particular institutional structure, which may or may not be honoring of indigenous practices, etc. But what I'm saying, like regulatory and applicable. And I it's like we already have seen a lot of like legalization of like psilocybin mushrooms. We have seen a lot more synthesis of the most primary psychoactive substances in various plants and fungi. There are studies around like MDMA assisted psychotherapy and psilocybin assisted psychotherapy. There are various things happening. I mean, even just thinking about, like, I believe in Arizona, there's a genuine church of ayahuasca, right? And so thinking about what are religious and spiritual structures that can be established wherein there is then a loophole around using controlled substances. Or substances that are not currently controlled, but that are at risk of becoming controlled because of their uses, actually becoming like, some kind of regulated. Things like that. Like all of that is very possible throughout Saturn and Pisces.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The other thing that I think is interesting, so now moving on maybe more towards like the, like post-spring equinox, more into the summer, is the eclipses really shifting from the Taurus-Scorpio axis to Aries-Libra axis.
Yeah, so the nodal axis will still be in Scorpio Taurus. But the the first eclipse of eclipse season
Mm.
is a new moon in Aries, right?
Ah.
So like the Taurus node, the north node, is close enough to the Taurus Aries border that the final degrees of Aries, a lunation happening there, will be an eclipse, because eclipses happen within about 17 degrees of the nodes.
Mm-hmm.
And what's also interesting is that in Aries season, we get two new moons. We get one at 0 degrees Aries, and then we get one at 29 degrees Aries. And the second one is the first eclipse in the Aries-Libra axis.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second eclipse of eclipse season happens as a full moon in Scorpio, right? It's a full moon at about 14 degrees of Scorpio, 14, 15 degrees of Scorpio,
Mm-hmm.
still within that 17-degree orb to the south node in Scorpio.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have two Mars-ruled eclipses
Mm-hmm.
for the first eclipse season, with Mars, transiting Mars currently in Cancer, the sign of its fall.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're talking about eclipses anyway, later in the year, the eclipses are October 4th and October 28th.
Mm-hmm.
The one on October 4th is a new moon in Libra
Mm-hmm.
eclipse. The second one is a full moon in Taurus eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
Libra and Taurus are both ruled by Venus. And at the time, Venus will be in Virgo, which is the sign of Venus's fall.
Exciting.
So
Yeah.
so both eclipse seasons next year are ruled by a single planet, with that
Mhm.
single planet in the sign of its a sign that is hard for it, like a sign of hardship and difficulty for that planet to express its essential nature without obstruction.
This one is interesting because when I felt into it, it feels uncomfortable. Like it
Yeah.
kind of felt, and also, you know, thinking as well about even just thinking about Taurus, Scorpio, and then Aries and Libra, right? Both are Venus and Mars ruled signs, and I feel
Yes.
like whenever we have transits that involve Mars and Venus, there's always kind of a corporality around it. Like it feels very much like an embodied thing, and the discomfort is not just conceptual. The discomfort is not just relational. It's really like in the physical body.
Yeah. That's so interesting because like the Mars and Venus signs, between the two of them, they have all 4 elements. Just like between the Mercury and Jupiter signs, you have all 4 elements, and between the luminaries and Saturn signs, you have all 4 elements, right? So there's that. There's also the fact that Mars and Venus are both of the night sect, which is the moon's team, which is much more about this like sort of grounded and embodied experience, right? Like our instincts and desires are much more Mars Venus than they are, say, Jupiter Saturn, right? Jupiter Saturn, that's not really instincts, but Mars Venus, that's very much instincts. Things like the animal body is very much a part of the Mars and Venus experiences. Yeah.
What are you considering with this eclipses and the shift?
Yeah, they're very corporeal. And then when we add on to the fact that the lunations, like the eclipses, like eclipses happen at the incarnational gates of the lunar nodes.
Yeah.
Right? These contact points where the perpetual immortal life-givingness of the sun and the matter-making, mortality-making, incarnation-making of the moon, and then the plane of incarnation of spirit infused with matter that is here on Earth, like that's what the node is, right? The node is the gate where all of that is lined up perfectly.
Yes.
And so, that's the beyond human control, chaotic, neutral, like super slip inside wormhole situation that is the eclipse season. And so then to have those ruled by and in signs associated with the instinctual planets of Mars and Venus, the body planets of Mars and Venus, it's very the sensory planets of Mars and Venus too, right? Like pain and pleasure, that's the Mars Venus axis. That's very yeah, it's very animalic, I guess.
Yes.
I'm thinking
Visceral. Mm-hmm.
visceral, animalic. I'm thinking about, especially thinking about the Venus side of things, like propriety and, what are the things that we do to be amiable, which in a lot of ways is also fawn response, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we see with Mars and Venus, the sympathetic nervous system activation responses of fight, flight, and fawn, right?
Right.
So yeah, there's something very interesting and activating, I think, about both eclipse seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anything else around the eclipses that kind of want to come through?
I don't think so. Just like the general advice that, when it comes to eclipses, it's important to relinquish the desire for control that is beyond the control that's actually available to you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Actually, I do have a question for you. So,
Yeah.
what I wonder about with this, the shift in the nodal axis, right, is the shift from like earth, water into fire, air, is very interesting. And I was kind of trying to feel into like, how does this feel? And I'm not quite sure how to contextualize that. Yeah.
It's also a shift from fixity into cardinality, which, there's definitely, that shift of like, okay, so the eclipses and fixed signs have been rough for everybody, regardless of whether you have shit in fixed signs, because it's eclipses, big change, right? Big shifts happening in parts of the chart that are the most resistant to change because they're fixed. And so to have the eclipses shifting from fixity into cardinality, it's like, no, this is areas where I do want to do movement. I do want to be initiation taking, initiative, right? Like there's something about reduction in friction or reduction in resistance to change, which may or may not be felt on an individual level as a reduction in resistance to change. But the speed potentially being less disorienting, even if there is still activation happening on like a physical or instinctual or emotional level.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Yeah. It makes me think of like, that maybe these eclipses will highlight areas that you've always been wanting to change anyway, but you never thought is possible. And then it's like, boom, whereas like the fix, when eclipses were happening in the fixed signs, there can be a sense of like, no, I don't want to let go of that thing,
Right, exactly. Even if you know that change is good for you, whatever the fixed area of your chart is, it's going to be a little bit harder to change just because it's fixed. Right? It's not like, part of I think change for fixed signs is like making sure that it feels safe to change, sufficiently safe, and having enough of a sensation that the discomfort of change is worth the consequence of the change.
Yeah.
Right. And especially for people's Taurus houses, like Uranus has been in there, like causing lots of earthquakes and breaking lots of China anyway. So there's a little bit less of that resistance than there would be otherwise, but there's also a little bit more, even if you are resistant, sorry, honey, this is happening energy, But moving into the Aries-Libra axis, at this point, Jupiter was already out of Aries, right? Jupiter will be in Taurus by the time the node moves into Aries, which I think is super interesting. But it's almost like Jupiter in Aries has primed the ground for Aries, the Aries node, to really be even hungrier. It's an interesting little swippy swap there. But yeah, I would say it will be there's the potential of sort of vertigo as the nodes shift, as the as the eclipses shift axes, because it's going from the sort of more inertia, like slowed inertia, like resistance, friction situation, in the Scorpio Taurus axis, in the Earth water axis, and then all of a sudden it's cardinal fire, cardinal air. We're just like, woo, yeah, here we go. It's it's the, like, I'm thinking about the carnival ride, where it's like a big column, and you, like, the ride is like, you sit on a seat, you go all the way to the top of the column, and then it drops you as though you're just like falling to the ground.
Right.
But you're held. It's okay.
Yes.
But that sort of like stomach ascending to your eyeballs sensation, I wouldn't be surprised if that an analog of that sensation is part of both eclipse seasons. With the one earlier in the year, we start with the cardinal eclipse and we end with the fixed eclipse. And that's the same thing later in the year, where we start with the cardinal eclipse and we end with the fixed eclipse. So there is something about being caught, right? Of just like that drop, like, but like you're caught before you actually splat.
I love that. Very visceral indeed. Yeah. How do you feel about moving to Mercury retrograde? The Mercury retrogrades happening in Earth signs. Actually, it's already starting now as we're recording in Capricorn season. But this is quite a shift from how in 2022 it's mostly been in air signs, right? And to me, this is interesting for my personal contemplation, because I was thinking about 2016, 2017, which was kind of the last time that we had these Mercury retrogrades in Earth signs. And personally, as someone whose ascendant is ruled by Mercury, I found myself kind of in the space in 2016, 2017, where a lot of my mental function is really like directed towards earthly matters. Whether that's accumulation or dealing with like the downfall of certain earthly things that were available before. And then now no longer becomes available.
That's super interesting. I'm like looking at, so this is a book that I definitely recommend putting in the show notes. Gary Caton's Hermetica Triptycha, The Mercury Elemental Year, which supposedly is the first in what should be 3 different books on Mercury. It's the only one that's out so far. But it goes into the way that the Mercury retrograde cycles, the Mercury conjunctions or whatever, form these triangles in the elements, like that slowly shifts over time. And Gary talks a lot about also paying attention to maximum elongations of Mercury on either side of the sun, as well as the conjunctions. And it's I super highly recommend. It's such a, like, I've been rereading it, and it's so rich. It's so potent. It's one of those books where rereading gives you more each time.
I'm excited to get it.
And just like thinking back on the previous Earth elemental year for Mercury, thinking about this one, this one is relatively shorter, which I think is interesting. But definitely thinking about like restructuring, like for me, it's restructuring concepts of self. One of the things that I think is great about this book is the way that he outlines how the elemental year emphasizes different trigons in the chart, like house-based trigons. So it's like, for me, the Mercury elemental year of Earth highlights my 1st, 9th, and 5th houses, which is the identity trigon, like what you believe in, what you value, what you want to create, who you are, what your body is, those sorts of things. And since you also have an Earth rising, that's also the trigon that is applicable for you. It's not just materiality in terms of like accumulating stuff. It's materiality as an accumulating self. And like reconfiguring the relationship with belief in matter and creativity and like generativity and like all of this sort of stuff. It's very cool. And it adds grounding to a year that otherwise has a lot of change happening, right? So, you know, Saturn moving into Pisces, that's Saturn moving into mutability. That's like, woo, wibbly wobbly, you know, Pluto moving into Aquarius. That's Pluto moving into fixity, but it's also Pluto moving into a sign that increases, like we're already seeing this. It's like it turns up the volume on both valid and overwrought fears around Aquarian things like social control, technology, that sort of thing. And then, you know, with the eclipses shifting and ruled by fallen planets, you know, there is also the sensation of like, am I actually held? Am I actually resourced? Whatever. And Mercury and like retrograding in Earth signs is, well, what do you need? What do you actually need?
Yeah. And like slowing down and taking inventory of that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Reconfiguring relationship to materiality, like in a year where we're also like, you know, going to be seeing more in terms of advances when it comes to AI and technology and, you know, alienation of labor, that kind of thing. You know, it makes sense. While we're talking about earth signs, though, I just also want to put in that in the last half of the year, we do have Jupiter and Taurus, also facilitating like that sort of expanded sense of like earthly grounding and rootedness, like absolute balms to the year. Jupiter and Taurus is one of my absolute favorite places for Jupiter to be because there is this affinity around sturdiness and stability and rootedness between Jupiter and Taurus. So yeah, like secret dignity.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to also be thinking about how Jupiter, you know, is really only in Aries for a very short period of time this time around.
Zooms
and then,
through.
Yeah.
Phew.
It's really, you know, wildly quick.
It's, yeah, I mean, it's in Taurus for just over a year. Solidly just in Taurus for just over a year.
Yeah.
I love. I'm so excited.
How are you feeling about that Jupiter in Taurus? Tell us a little bit more, maybe, since you're so excited about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, like to me, it feels lush. You know, there is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus that will occur that has the potential to be quite upheavaling, for lack of a better word. But it feels like a positive upheaval because it's Jupiter. I don't know, maybe this is just my exalted Jupiter talking and I'm just like, I love Jupiter. Jupiter's my favorite, right? But you know, Jupiter has a lot of significations that in actual practicality also then bring us into unpleasant feelings, right? It's like grief is in its own way a very Jupiterian feeling, you know. Yeah, you know, the meaning that is made because death exists is very Jupiterian in a lot of ways. But you know, I think about Jupiter and Taurus and I just think about I think about the physical sensation that I have whenever I'm in like the woods of the Olympic Peninsula. You know, like whenever I'm hanging out with some really nice big old Sitka spruces and there's just this like melting into the ground and there's this simultaneous like, oh honey, you think your problems are a problem? How long do you live again? Okay, because I've been here for a really long time. And I'm pretty sure that while your problems are very distressing, they're not as big as you think they are. You know, there's like that feeling. Like very kind of kindergarten teacher. But also very you know, like I'm reminded of the Celtic god, the Dagda, like the great god or the good god, who is just like this very big man who has like a big cauldron full of stew. You know, just like we're just gonna eat. It's okay. It will be okay. There might be big disruptions with Uranus. You know, it's like Uranus and Jupiter and Taurus might look like innovations in food, but it also might look like issues with food, like who knows, but um there's something about like Jupiter in Taurus is a person with really big hands who always has bacon in the refrigerator, you know?
Yeah. I remember something you once said, which is Jupiter is the planet of stabilization, and Jupiter bringing stability. And I think it would be really interesting to see that conjunction with Uranus as perhaps a stabilizing force to what has been unstable for some time too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I'm hoping one of my hopes for the Jupiter Uranus co-presence and conjunction is the like affirmation of the necessity of unionization in a lot of fields, like a return to the security that is provided by united workers. You know, because like unions are how the dispersion of prosperity happened in mid-century America, right? Like, granted, a lot of that prosperity was siphoned to particular classes and races of people, but it did create the American middle class, right? And so with Uranus and Taurus, we have been seeing quite a lot of efforts to unionize, and some of those being successful, some of those being less successful. And I'm hoping that Jupiter's addition to Taurus will improve the success of the unionization efforts as something that will assist with increasing stability, sturdiness, reliability in material ways for more people. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
We'll see.
But
that's one of my hopes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We have one more. We might as well. There is Venus retrograde in Leo from kind of late July to early September. And I would say that that's probably kind of, can we say like the last major thing? I mean, towards the end of the year, we still have like the eclipses and, you know, Pluto moving back and forth. But I feel like the second half of the year is kind of a little bit less seismic, maybe, in terms of the changes.
Yeah, I would say it's like the most seismic thing I would say at the end of the year would be like in the middle of November, there's a Mars Cazimi opposite Uranus.
Yeah.
That is like a very potentially literally seismic of, maybe not literally, but it's not small potatoes. But yeah, in terms of like
Mars
the big,
would be in Scorpio at that time, right?
Yeah, there's a Mars Cazimi in Scorpio opposite Uranus. Yeah. In terms of like year defining astrology, I would say that the Venus retrograde is the last like major thing to really talk about.
Yeah.
You know, the last time there was a Venus retrograde in Leo, I believe that was in 2015. And it actually stationed retrograde at the very, very beginning of Virgo. It stationed retrograde at like 46 minutes of Virgo, and then backed into Leo. So as with all Venus retrogrades, it's always potent to look back at previous iterations in order to think about the shape for yourself. But, you know, this Venus retrograde in Leo, I know, I believe Austin brought up, you know, the potential of this coinciding with ongoing. Oh, it was Austin, but he was referencing to the work of Nick Dagan Best, who has done a lot of work around Venus retrograde cycles in mundane astrology. But thinking about like women's rights and reproductive rights, reproductive justice, as like kind of a larger story, like a larger, you know, bigger in the world story. But just on a personal level, Venus retrogrades are consistent opportunities to restructure and recomprehend one's own values and desires in whatever area of the chart that retrograde is happening for you personally, as styled by the concerns of the sign that it's happening in, right? So with Leo, Venus retrogrades in Leo have a lot about like your own personal sovereignty as relates to being in relationship with whatever, you know, not just romantic relationship.
Yeah.
I will forever harp on relationship is not only romantic relationship. But yeah, that's one thing I'm thinking a lot about when it comes to the Venus retrograde in Leo. What's your sovereignty? What is it that you need honored, respected, and prioritized in order to not lose the most important parts of yourself? And we can always think about the Inanna mythology when it comes to Venus retrogrades of Venus descending into the underworld to meet with her sister Ereshkigal, who is mad at her for valid reasons. But on the way down, Inanna has to remove all of her garments of power. And then it's just her naked in front of her sister for judgment. And so who are you in your sovereignty whenever you release those structures that you may believe have been important to your self-sovereignty?
Yeah.
But maybe aren't actually.
I love that. I also have been thinking about this one in terms of the heart. Leo in medical astrology kind of ruling the heart. And, again, similar to what you were saying earlier, like the heart is not just for romantic things, right? It also, and that romance is not just in the realm of like romantic relationship. That one can kind of reconfigure one's relationship to romance in other areas,
Yeah, I'm being reminded of this post I made on Instagram. Like, I'm not even going to be able to say what year, but it's like it's always possible to flirt with the cosmos. It was something like along those lines, where it's like, what does it mean to be in flirtation with, and in sort of playful eroticism with. And, I feel like a Venus retrograde in Leo, there is something about like the potential of finding new ways of playing in that kind of cosmic sandbox, I guess.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Diana. Curious to hear any final thoughts you have around 2023. The shape of 2023.
Yeah, I feel like 2023 is a really great year for the implementation of imaginative vision, right? Like working towards that implementation. That's because of Saturn in Pisces. It's also because of Pluto's dip into Aquarius. It's because of Jupiter railing through Aries and then solidly landing in Taurus.
Yeah.
Like, what is it that you desire and what do you need to do to make it happen? Those feel like really relevant questions to me when I look at the overall astrology of 2023. Like, how do you, even just like the Mercury retrograde and earth signs, how do you actually make it tangible? Right? How do you, like with Saturn and Pisces, how do you cohere the imaginal? Coherence being a Saturn word, the imaginal being a Pisces word. With Pluto and Aquarius, how do you engage more intensely with the hyperstructures of reality? With the nodes moving from water and earth to air and fire, ruled by Mars and Venus, it's like, how do you go from dealing with the compost to actually using the microbiota and nutrients released by compost? That sort of thing, like actually doing this. I think is part of why I do think like this particular end of year has this like goals, let's do it energy.
Yeah. That's also making me think of how, a lot of people kind of complain when Jupiter was in Pisces that it wasn't going to be like, it wasn't this la la land situation that a lot of people were kind of hoping for. And I think it's so interesting to be thinking about like the astrology of 2023 as being somehow connected to what emerged internally when Jupiter was in Pisces, right? Like, what did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about your relationship to your own internal reality?
Right.
That you can now start to install in the external reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things I think about with Jupiter and Pisces is, the sort of Like, I think there are a lot of people who, when Jupiter was in Pisces, were kind of recognizing, like, oh, the things that I thought I wanted aren't the things that I actually want.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, even just thinking about it as like
It's very Eight of Cups.
ongoing, very Eight of Cups, very, very Eight of Cups. Like, what I thought that I wanted isn't what's going to give me what I want.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And I think there's also been some amount of, and I don't know, I think people who are really good at being honest with themselves, or who have been given the gift of people who reflect to them whether or not they're being honest with themselves, like, there might even be a bit of, oh shit, I've been ignoring this part of my system, the Pisces part, which is not just imaginal. It is also the depths of emotion. It is also the awareness of interconnection. You know, just even thinking about how over the past decade, there's been an increase in interest in animism and relationality with the more than human world, but seeing even more of that become even more acute. It's like Sophie Strand publishes her book under Jupiter and Pisces. Right? And just like this pull into interconnectivity, like living systems. You know, Leah's class happens under Jupiter and Pisces. You know, how does this pull us into relationship with more than ourselves? Like, our individual desires aren't being met because they're not the desires that will actually pull us towards what we genuinely want. Because what we genuinely want as humans, as social creatures, is to be part of the web.
Wow.
That kind of belonging.
Wow.
And I think a lot of the grief and sadness that people have been experiencing, whether or not they're aware of it, has like sort of secret roots in the sensation of unbelonging that goes along with cultures who forget that we're the little siblings.
Wow. Thank you, Diana. I will definitely have to have you back.
Of course.
I will hunt you. But
just like sit me down in a session and be like, okay, open your calendar now, Diana.
We'll make this work.
Do what we gotta do. We can do what we gotta do. Yeah.
I love talking with you so much, and a part of me is like wishing that I were, you know, in a much better health condition to like actually be super much more engaged. But
what are you? No self-critique. No self-critique. You were doing great. None of that.
I want to honor your time, and I have a couple final questions for you. And the first one is, I'm curious what comes up for you when you hear the phrase "healing the spirit." And that can literally be anything, including like critiques, questions, wonderings, or images, memories.
So the thing that comes up when I think about the phrase "healing the spirit" is, you know, what I even started this conversation with, of returning to the understanding of and occupation of the niche of being human. The ecological niche of being human, and it being a role of responsibility, but also a role of adoration and devotion and love, right? Like, love is my primary propellant when it comes right down to it. And I feel like healing the spirit, you know, even just thinking about in 2021, I took a few months, 12th house months, out in the desert by myself with my cat. It was in between leases, or in between houses or whatever. And
I think I remember
one of the things
this
that
house
happened
too.
yeah, it was cute, right? But one of the things I remember about that time, or one of the things that was really moving about that time, is I came into a new definition of healing for myself. And healing for me is increasing the capacity to be in relationship. And so when I think healing the spirit, it's, what are the aspects of spirit that are currently not as capacious when it comes to being in relationship? So, yeah.
Thank you. That's profound. And how can people find your work?
People can find me on Instagram at Damashana. There will be a link because it's kind of awkward to spell. People can find me on my website, which is damashana.com, but you can also go to dianaroseharper.com. It will take you to the same place. Definitely recommend joining my newsletter, as I'm trying to prioritize that more. I keep saying that. It's a bit easier now that I have an email platform that feels more enjoyable to use. Nice. I'm also on Twitter. I'm also on Patreon. Patreon is the primary place to be if, for whatever reason, you want to work one-on-one with me, or have early access to things that are in process. Yeah.
I also want to add that you have incredible teachings on your site that people can purchase that are just so amazing. And most of them are like really, really affordable. So don't sleep on it.
Yeah, I try to make things, like especially recordings, I try to make them as affordable as feels self-honoring. Because I do want to create, like, one of the things that I'm thinking about hard in terms of goals for 2023 is creating more ways for people to engage with the work that wants to come through me at affordable, accessible levels. Because it just feels important. So
yeah. Thank you, Diana. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. This has been amazing. Such a gift.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for inviting me to do this for your listeners.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, that is it for my conversation with Diana. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. I hope that conversation helped you contextualize the coming year a little bit more, perhaps give you a chance to contemplate on the overarching themes of the coming year. And if you are still sort of in an ongoing process of crafting your New Year resolutions or intentions or goals, or just, some of the things that you want to see happen in 2023, I hope that this episode was helpful for that. If you resonate with Diana's voice, I highly recommend that you follow Diana's work. Diana, I believe, has a course that you can sign up for until March 8th, 2023. It is focused on Saturn, and I believe the course title is Our Lady of Time. I was in Diana's course on Jupiter, and it was incredible. So if you would like to cultivate a deeper relationship with Saturn, I recommend that you check that out. It's going to be on the show notes below. And join Diana's Patreon if that's what calls to you. If you have been enjoying this podcast, if you have been enjoying this episode, I would love it if you could help us get the word out there, be that through sharing with friends, or honestly, the best way you can support the podcast is just to leave a review. Apple Podcast, to my understanding, is the only platform where you can do that at the moment. And I've been telling people that literally 2 to 3 sentences are enough. More is always appreciated, but, keep it minimal, and encourage other people to listen to the podcast in that way. And if you don't listen through Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave 5 stars on Spotify or any other podcast platform that you are listening on. All right. I can't wait to see you again next time, whenever that may be. And I hope you take good care of yourselves, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you so much.